Now it's time to talk about succession, this natural process where ecosystems change over time. So all ecosystems go through this process known as succession. Some take a little bit longer than others, but each ecosystem, its goal is to get to the mature biome of whatever place you are in the world. So in the eastern temperate deciduous forests here, that's the goal, is to get to a mature or a climax forest. So the steps along the way is what's called succession. So here's how it works. And what we're going to start with is secondary succession. And secondary succession differs from primary succession. What we're going to do is when we alter an ecosystem, when we, let's say, burn down or cut down a forest, what starts first are always the annual weeds or the perennial grasses that we find here in this part of the world. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to group these two stages together. We're going to call this the herbaceous stage. All right, and herbaceous literally means green plants. So what we're talking about here is just our regular green plants come in. All right, and annual weeds are those weeds that come up on an annual basis. They live for 1 year and they die, but they typically rely on a seeding process, or their seeds blow very easily in the wind and they're able to transport themselves different places. So first stage, in the herbaceous stage, we'll get these annual weeds, but we might also see these perennial weeds and grasses right away. Perennial means yearly. So those are the plants and flowers and grasses that if you had a fire, maybe the roots were still preserved in the ground, so that plant will come up again the next year. So in this herbaceous stage, we'll have annual and perennial weeds and grasses, and the key part here is that we're starting with the soil that was left behind from our catastrophe. All right, and that's what separates this from secondary succession from primary succession. In primary succession, we actually have to go back further from scratch and start with bare rock. In secondary succession, at least our soils were maintained. So we're not starting from scratch. And that's the difference between secondary succession and primary succession. We're not starting from scratch. We have our soils. And that's a big difference there. So in this herbaceous stage, with our annual weeds and perennial grasses, we're talking about 0 to 5 years of growth after our disturbance. And what we're going to do as we go through this note here is we're going to recognize the time that it takes for these things to occur, these stages to occur. So what you can do is, if you're driving home today and you see an area that's been left alone for a while and you see the grasses are still growing, it's been anywhere from the last 5 years since that area has been last disturbed. So you can tell the time from the last disturbance if you know a little bit about this process. Alright, so the herbaceous plants will create a good environment for shrubs and small trees to come in. And that brings us to the next stage of succession, the shrub stage. Based upon a little bit better conditions now, a little bit richer soils, small shrubs will begin to grow, and you might even get a couple of saplings in here. But during this shrub stage, things start to grow a little bit taller, a little bit thicker, and that's going to create conditions that are right for the next stage of succession, our young forest. Alright, now the shrub stage, it might take 5 to 15 years for that stage to provide the right conditions for the young forest to take hold. But once it does, once those species, what we're going to call the pioneer species of trees, come in, we're talking anywhere between 15 and 80 years for this young forest to be established. All right, and these pioneer species, we call them pioneer species because they're the first trees that are really going to come into an area after the shrub stage. In our place in the world, the pioneer species are things like the eastern white pine, the ash trees, things like cedar, some maple trees, sassafras trees, dogwoods. These are trees that might only grow 15 to 20 feet tall, and these are the pioneer species that will now begin to provide the right conditions for the next stage of succession, the mature forest. So they call this a young pine forest. Now I gave you a nice range here, 15 to 80 years, and you could tell how young the young forest actually is by the size of the trees. All right, the smaller they are, the closer to 15, 20 years ago since it's been since the disturbance. But if those trees are big and mature themselves, you could be 60, 70, 80 years into a young forest. So what happens is over time during the young forest stage, we'll start seeing those shrubs disappear. The grasses will disappear, and we'll start to create a canopy. You see the big canopy here. We'll start to create more shade at the surface of the forest. So most of the trees and the shrubs will die out, and now that sets the stage for shade-tolerant seedlings to start growing. And that's important for the next stage. So it's important for the young forest to provide enough shade so that the grasses and the shrubs all die out and those pioneer species pretty much die out. All right, so this stage is literally committing suicide for the next stage, the shade-tolerant seedlings. And if you don't get those conditions, you're not going to progress to mature forest. These shade-tolerant seedlings will become the trees for the climax forest. And in our part of the world, it's the oak trees and the hickory trees that dominate our forests in this biome. So oak and hickory are huge trees that have taken over the canopy, and they're seedlings in the young forest stage but will dominate within the mature forest. All right, and you're talking around 80 to 100 plus years. And once those trees start falling over, you might have another forest fire at that point. So we're talking about 100 plus years that the mature forest can dominate. Okay? So those are the stages of secondary succession within a forest biome of, let's say, eastern Pennsylvania. Okay, that's what we should be seeing in our forest. So think about the Seek Center. Think about the woods and areas nearby your house, and you can tell when the last time those areas were disturbed based on the plants and the trees and the size of the trees and the species of trees that are growing there. Alright, so let's take a look at primary succession. A little bit different. Alright, primary succession. Almost the same, but you have to go backwards a little further, like I was saying. Alright, this is not as common. From here over to the right, everything is the same as secondary succession. That is secondary succession. But things are a little bit different here as we try to establish the soil needed to get our grasses and our perennial and annual grasses and plants. Alright, so we have to go all the way back and start with exposed rock. So what we need is somehow to create soil so that the rest of the process can continue. We need plants in these later stages to be able to obtain nutrients and water, and soil does that. So we need to come up with a way to get soil. Alright, so what happens is with exposed rock, there will be cracks and crevices and fractures. Everything starts there. So water will accumulate, sit there, and in the winter time, that water will freeze and make those cracks bigger. And we're talking about freeze-thaw type of physical weathering. All right, a little bit different from erosion, but we're talking about physical weathering processes. And as those cracks get bigger, they will allow organic material and more water to collect. And before you know it, you have lichens and mosses. Okay, it's going to be those lichens and mosses that are going to grow there, and it's going to bring in material decomposers, and we're going to start getting soil. And this becomes our pioneer community. All right, these lichens and mosses, they're almost airborne organic life which settles in. And it's very slowly over a long period of time that this occurs. It takes a long time for soil to begin to get our soil on which our annual grasses and our weeds can grow. So primary succession are areas that start out brand new from exposed rock. The initial process takes so long that we have to double or triple the time that it takes for the entire process to take place. All right, there's many examples where primary succession takes place. Let's take a look here. Here you have a sand dune. Okay, so we start with bare sand, and the first thing that's going to come in are our beach grasses. But there's one problem with the beach grasses, is that the weather is constantly breaking them up, moving them around, constantly starting over again. All right, so you never quite get past the grass stage. So if you go to the beach, that's why the beach, you'll see these large areas of grasses. I mean, hurricanes come in, big giant storms submerge and move the grasses and the roots. So if you go inland a little bit, you'll see the shrub stage. But here towards the ocean more, you never really get past this grass stage. Another example here is glaciers. As glaciers retreat, so here's the front of the glacier, and as this glacier melts and retreats in this direction, it moves back, leaving bare rock exposed. So it starts the process of succession. All right, so as it moves back, exposed rock, we're going to go in this direction. Here you have exposed rock, but then the lichens and the mosses will begin, and after a long period of time, you'll start getting those grasses, and once the grasses come in, that will lead to our young forest and hopefully our mature climax forest. Okay, so that's an example of primary succession. This is an important concept, and you literally should be able to drive around your neighborhood and your area and recognize how old things are. Alright, so here you go. Here's an example. You have a sidewalk where the grasses are starting to come in, and this is primary succession. We started with bare rock. We had concrete blocks. If you leave a parking lot untouched, nature will slowly turn it back into an oak hickory forest here in Pennsylvania. All right, nature has this amazing ability to take a damaged or a disrupted or altered ecosystem and create its true biome. And if we allow it to occur, it will result in tremendous biodiversity across the planet. Here's another example, and I'm giving you this example so that you go here and check this out. This is at the Lehigh Gap hiking trail, and you can literally walk these trails. If you look down here, here's the trail going through this landscape. What happened here, we have the New Jersey Zinc Company. All right, the New Jersey Zinc Company was operating from 1898. It was shut down here in 1980, and this is in Palmerton, PA. If you go north on the northeast extension, you'll go through the Lehigh Tunnel. It's the next exit. It's the exit right after the Lehigh Tunnel. You'll get off and follow signs for the Lehigh Gap Trail. And if you're in Palmerton and you're driving right along the river, you'll see this industry, this abandoned industrial site. It was where the New Jersey Zinc Company was operating and smelting in Palmerton, PA. All right, here are some stats. 80 years of operation. All right, airborne emissions. Here are some that stuck out to me. This is somewhat concerning. All right, we have 47 tons of cadmium per year. Okay, we have 95 tons of lead per year. 3,575 tons of zinc per year. All right, and here you go. 3,000 pounds of sulfur dioxide. In the 80 years of operation, there were 3,000 pounds of sulfur dioxide emitted from this factory per hour. Okay? Sulfur dioxide combined with fog and precipitation forms acid rain, which contributed to widespread deforestation of this area. On top of that, heavy metal accumulations like cadmium, lead, and zinc. Heavy metal accumulations in soil are phytotoxic. Anytime you see phyto, we're talking about plants. They're toxic to plants, which inhibited the reestablishment of vegetation in soils. So even though this was shut down in 1980, after 80 years of operations and poisoning the soil and acid rain, it literally killed all the plants and inhibited the growth of new plants in this environment. So when you go to this place today, it's this terribly barren landscape that looks like a disaster happened there. And you can argue that it did, from the New Jersey Zinc Company. So I encourage you to go up to Lehigh Gap Trail and hike in this environment, and maybe you can find some geocaches there and enjoy being in this environmental disaster area, which was designated a Superfund site and has been designated a cleanup site, and they're using different types of new technologies to try and establish growth there and get succession going once again. All right, but right now it looks a lot like exposed rock at this place. All right, and here you go. This is what it looks like on the hillsides, and you could see the town of Palmerton down there. All right, but this was once a thriving forest on the hills and mountains just north of here. Alright, so finally, succession can occur in any ecosystem. To end here, I want to show you this pond, or this lake, that is undergoing succession, pond succession. All ponds do this. No pond or lake is permanent. Every single one is temporary because it goes through succession. So if you look here, you see the old boundary, and here's the old boundary of the pond. Alright, here's the new boundary. So all this in here is sediment that's beginning to fill in from the nearby areas, and as that sediment fills in here, plants start to grow and encroach. So ponds are in a constant state of dying. They're always closing, right, as sediment comes in here and invades the depression. So there you go. That's pond succession. Think about our pond at Seek. The pond is getting smaller and smaller until it's disappearing. So all ponds are constantly dying. It's somewhat sad, but it's nature's way of changing its ecosystems and ultimately doing what's best for itself and the biodiversity on the planet. So there you go. That's a little bit about succession. Hopefully a little bit more knowledgeable about distinguishing the difference between primary and secondary succession. Hopefully you can drive around your area and appreciate the older, more mature parts of the forests around here. You can also date the timing of when something was last disturbed, and you can just understand and appreciate nature's way of getting towards its ultimate biome and this process we call succession.